Okay, hello YouTube. Today I'm going to attempt to do another video on E4, E5. I suspect that this will be the last video that I do on E4, E5 because it was a video I didn't even think I was going to make, but I went ahead and decided to make it, not for the opening itself, but maybe just for the idea of how to face openings like this and how to think about your opening repertoire. So the opening in question is an opening called the Halloween Gambit. So this happens after E4, E5, knight of 3, knight C6, knight C3, knight f6. We have the four knights, and then white, of course, plays this wild and crazy and ridiculous gambit. He plays knight takes E5. Now, I want to talk about how to think about these gambits in terms of how they fit into your opening repertoire, because there are actually several gambits like this in chess that people can try, and a lot of people think that they're highly entertaining. But the reality is that these gambits are actually, I would categorize them as, from a preparation and from a theoretical perspective, they are pointless. And what I mean by that is they don't have any independent value within a repertoire. So let me try to explain further. Another opening that falls under this category would be like the Smith-Morra Gambit. So the reason that these openings don't have independent value within your opening repertoire is, let's take like the Smith-Morra Gambit, for example. So after e4 to c5, we could play something like d4 and then takes and then c3. Now at this point, if I play knight f6, your Smith-Morra Gambit legitimately has no independent value, because white has nothing better than to play e5 and then knight d5, and we have a c3 Sicilian. And of course, white could have forced me to play a c3 Sicilian after the move c3, and if at this point I have knight f6 in my repertoire, I cannot do anything as black to avoid the c3 Sicilian, and more importantly, I can't avoid this exact version of the c3 Sicilian with black. So here's the way I want you to look at this, is if white wanted to make you play a c3 Sicilian, he could have done that by simply playing c3 on move 2. And if knight f6 is already in your repertoire, there is no reason not to simply go into this with black. There is no independent value for him playing the Smith-Morra. So the question becomes at that point, is black's position so significantly better, and are you 100% confident as the person playing the black pieces that your position is so much more significantly better that you're going to abandon a position that you're completely familiar with to try to refute your opponent's Smith-Morra? And the answer to that is usually, maybe. You know, it's one of those things. It's like, you better have some really good preparation, because when somebody plays the Smith-Morra, the statement that they're making is they're saying, hey, I've studied this opening a whole lot, I've studied this gambit a ton, and I truly believe that if you accept this pawn that I have compensation. So clearly they've looked at it. The question, have you as the black player? So number one, like I said, you don't have to look at it, because you could just play a decline. You can play knight f6 and transpose into a c3 Sicilian. You don't have to have this in your repertoire. And if you don't have this in your repertoire, that's fine, because you can avoid it. But you certainly shouldn't go into the complications with somebody. Once they play c3, they're telling you they have it in their repertoire. So they've looked at this, and they've looked at it with an engine, they've looked at it on their computer, or at least they should have. If they've played it at this point, they should have looked at it. So the only reason that you should accept this gambit is if you've also looked at it and you're fairly confident that you have some sort of major advantage with black, and that's going to justify stepping outside of a position that you're very familiar with to play for that major advantage. So that's why I consider these types of gambits pointless, because the only types of players, at least on the highest level, that are going to accept this are players that have a lot of preparation on it. So you're either going to play against people that are going to decline the gambit and make you play a c3 Sicilian, or you're going to play against people that are highly prepared. That's not exactly a good thing when you have an opening that you want to play. And the same thing can be said of the Halloween Gambit. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, knight takes c5. Okay, there's a really good way to decline this gambit if you want to decline it. So number one, you should obviously take the knight. You should play knight takes c5. That's a whole piece. d4. And then this knight, and this is a good general rule when people are hitting the center with these two center pawns, you don't want to retreat the knight back to a square where they can keep pushing their center pawns with tempo. So you want to retreat the knight to a square where it's out of the way. You also don't want to decline the gambit right here. There were actually a number of players that tried to give the piece back right away with a move like d6. This is simply bad because clearly white has some sort of slight edge after takes, queen takes queen. This is no doubt slight edge white. So you want to decline to move later. You want to play knight g6 and then after e5. I found 2 games where 2,500 plus players were faced with this position with black, and clearly they were thinking the same thing I'm thinking, which is I have to have my positions I have to have positions like this in my repertoire as black anyway, where I would play a move like bishop b4, and I would give up this knight and I would take back with the queen. And here black is clearly better. We have a symmetrical pawn structure, and we have 3 tempos to white's 1. So we have a clear slight advantage black. It's not a huge advantage, but it's a clear slight advantage black. And if white wanted to force me to play a position where I have a symmetrical pawn structure in the center of the board and I'm up 2 tempo, I guarantee he can force it. So I have to have this in my repertoire anyway. And since I have to have this in my repertoire, I might as well go ahead and play it if I'm not familiar with the wild complications of accepting the gambit. So I've got 2 examples of this that happened where 2,500 had to play this position with black. They were playing against relatively weak opposition. The first 2,500 is going to go over is Go versus Ernst that was played in the Netherlands in 2012, and this went really well for black. He played g3, which was already a bad move, and then queen c6, d5, takes, queen takes c3, so now he's just clearly up a pawn, and as you can see, black is better developed. So, I mean, this game didn't get any better, but this is a 2,500 plus player playing against a 2,175, so we can this is just kind of going to be the expected result, kind of regardless. So black just gets a huge attack and basically just demolishes white, mates his king in the middle of the board. And then there's one other example after queen f6, bishop c4. This was Pollock versus Rager. This was a 22-28 versus a 26-51 played in Poland in 2014. And, you know, black just castled, bishop c3, bc3, d6, just finishing his development. b6 so he can move his bishop out, rook b8. And then here shortly, white just, after queen f5, white hangs a piece and then resigns. So that game also went pretty short. But in both cases, black had just a slight edge right out of the opening, and there was nothing special. So can you accept the gambit? Well, I did find an example of 2,500 players where one person accepted the gambit, but only one example. And this example was played between Wind Power and Nuritano in 2007. So this example is, if you can just tell from the names alone, these are engines. These are 2 computers that played this out. So if you say, hey, I want to decline this gambit because I think I'm very, very confident that I'm up a piece and I'm clearly better, I want to point out this was actually played between 2 2,500 plus engines. It was a game that lasted 52 moves, and it ended in a draw. So if these complications aren't enough to where one engine can clearly beat another engine, then it's probably not clearly enough for you to confidently say that you are definitely better. Let's just put it this way. White clearly has some kind of compensation for the material. He's done a piece for only 1 pawn, but that is a huge center. And black is going to have a very difficult time finishing his development. And this advantage is actually something that's persistent. Even if you survive the opening, this is something that lasts. So let me just show you this game between these 2 engines real quick. After bishop c4, black plays the correct move. Black strikes back in the middle with d5. Black has to do something like this to get him back into the game fairly quickly. It's already a dangerous position for black. So again, this is between 2 engines. This isn't, 2 people, so we're not going to see a lot of, major errors. We might see some minor positional errors, but we're not going to see any major tactical errors. And the person, the machine playing white just has this persistent thing going on in the middle of the board. And black can't solve this problem satisfactorily for the entire game. So, white is just kind of keeping up the pressure of everything going on in the middle, and at no point was black ever able to completely get out of the woods on his position, even after all this craziness happened. He ends up having to give up this exchange. And actually, this endgame is probably slight edge black, but what's interesting is this is the exact type of endgames that computers do kind of poorly in. Basically, computers are bad at pushing past pawns when they need to, and it has to do with how the piece value tables are programmed into machines. I have actually looked at these piece value tables, and part of it is a lot of the piece value tables, especially for weaker engines, they're programmed kind of to be discouraged from moving certain pawns, especially early in the opening, because they can create king safety issues. But that kind of becomes an issue when you have two passed pawns that desperately need to be pushed to prove an advantage, like in this position, because the computer is actually reluctant to do so because it doesn't see an increase in value for these pieces. Because that's how computers make decisions. They make a decision on what move to make based on a relative increase in value of their pieces. So moving a piece from one square to another to relatively increase the value is how they make their choices. So that's why you see like a lot of decisions that are probably incorrect. The computer choosing to improve its bishop and choosing to improve its king instead of it choosing to improve its pawns when it needed to, and it slowly just kind of gives away its advantage until there was just nothing left and the computer could no longer advance its pawns, and so just a draw was agreed between these two engines when it became clear. Usually when draws are agreed in these engine tournaments, it's because it becomes clear to both of the operators that the computers intend to repeat moves. So at this point, both of the computers probably just intended, black probably just intended to move his bishop back and forth, and white intended to move his rook back and forth. So they agreed to shake hands. So if you don't have a clear enough advantage keeping that material, between two engines, in my mind, it's not worth me as a player, to put the effort into memorizing some exact refutation when, as far as I know, no perfect refutation exists for this opening. White is always going to have some sort of play. White is always going to have some sort of compensation for this material, even just long term. So why not I just play a position where I have a very clear slight edge with black, because if white wants to, he can make me play that type of position anyway in some other opening or some other line. So that is a type of position that has to be in my repertoire regardless, and my opponent could have chose to make me play that, so why not play it here, take that slight advantage, and just go on to outplay my opponent with the slight advantage, instead of giving him some wild, unclear position that he is clearly prepared to play, where I'm at a disadvantage, not in terms of the position on the board, but in terms of preparation. So that's my advice on how to face the Halloween Gambit, and openings like the Halloween Gambit. So depending on how much preparation you have on the Smith-Morra could fall into that category as well. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.